Okay, so story time. There is a moment in Citizen Sleeper that is going to stick with me, and we're diving into immediate spoilers here, but it's a single story beat and not like a huge plot twist or anything, so stick with me here. I'll avoid the context as much as I can. So there's this guy, Ethan, and he's just a real dick. Within 10 minutes of meeting you, he's already set up an extortion deal where you pay for him to go party all day, and that probably tells you everything you need to know about how much he just absolutely sucks. But after a few weeks of having to put up with this, you show up to the bar he hangs out at and find him plastered out of his mind. And you're given this moment where you can decide to push your luck, to try and get the upper hand and slip out from under Ethan's thumb. You can swipe his gun and tell him to jog off. But there's a third character in this scene, the bartender. Just some random guy that works here that you've never talked to and doesn't even get a name. And he sees what you're up to, but you have no way of knowing how this guy is going to react to you pulling a gun in his establishment. In fact, when I was given this opportunity, how he might react was the main thing that gave me pause. So the stakes are 3 guys in an uneasy standoff with 1 gun on the table, and whoever has the gun calls the shots in this scene. 2 guys have pretty clear motivations and are pretty much down to shoot each other, but the third is a total question mark. I decided to pull the gun, and one thing led to another. This turned out to actually be a pretty foolhardy decision, and I lost that gun as quickly as I got it. But then the gun ended up in the hands of the bartender. This complete stranger, who has never said a word to me and I know nothing about, suddenly holds all the power in this entire scene. But as I quickly realized, this guy has also had to suffer with Ethan's shit for days on end, and so when he gets to decide what happens, he decides to point the gun at Ethan too. I was saved by this complete stranger, not just from the immediate threat of getting shot, but also from a future of continued servitude as this guy's piggy bank. And this bartender does nothing else in this story, never appears again. Even in the immediate aftermath, you never trade words, only a nod and a shared glance that says, well, thank God that's over. You're just 2 dudes who have had to take a ton of shit from the same asshole, briefly united in your combined suffering, who teamed up for a second to do something about it. And then you drift back to your own lives and never see each other again. And man, that one perfect moment just sums up the vibe of Citizen Sleeper so hard. So you might have noticed that we're foregoing the usual format of these reviews, but real quick as always, I'm Alex and this is First 5. The way this works is that I play a game for 5 hours, in this case 7 because I just wanted to see the credits, and then I tell you if you can get anything worthwhile out of that time commitment, because we're all busy adults and we don't have 20 hours to wait for a game to get good. And oh boy, did I really get something worthwhile out of Citizen Sleeper. Just absolutely what a phenomenal time. If you enjoyed the cold open, please, for the love of God, go buy this game. It has 100 more moments just as awesome as the one I just shared. If you haven't picked up on it yet, Citizen Sleeper is a fairly narrative-centric game, a cyberpunk visual novel that probably strikes closest to Disco Elysium if you want a cultural touchstone. And much like Disco Elysium and 100 other narrative-heavy games, it draws a lot of influence from the tabletop RPG space, but where most video games are riffing on Dungeons & Dragons, Citizen Sleeper is specifically drawing from systems like Powered by the Apocalypse and Blades in the Dark, 2 TTRPG systems that are very different from your classic D&D experience, with design philosophies more focused on role-playing and storytelling over tactically crunchy or satisfying combat. Citizen Sleeper speaks in the exact same mechanical language as these lesser-known systems, with drives instead of quests that, when fulfilled, empower your character, and contextual results that go beyond simple binary success/failure states, and ticking clocks that both represent progress or impending doom depending on context. Some clocks tick away a little bit each day, others when you take specific actions, or conversely, fail at accomplishing something. It's an extremely good fit for a narrative-only game in which violence and strife exists as a punctuation to the narrative, but not as a constant part of it, where the threat of that violence can dangle over your head in the form of an ominous clock that's slowly filling, and success can sometimes be a matter of going 2 steps forward, then 1 step back. For example, early on, you're tasked with breaking a derelict ship down into scrap, but you can choose to investigate the ship instead, trying to figure out why it was destroyed. And if you roll a more middling result, the clocks representing your own investigation and the progression of the ship's decommissioning can progress at the same time, getting you closer to both a victory and a failure state simultaneously, as there's a very real risk that the ship will be a pile of scrap before you can learn anything. Those are the kind of interesting, nuanced situations that these TTRPG systems can engender. And if there's one place where Citizen Sleeper could have perhaps pushed a little further, it's with these interesting and dynamic consequences. Very often in the TTRPGs that inspire it, mixed results tend to be a victory or success, but at a cost, where you get what you want, but with unintended side effects or additional complications. Instead, many of Citizen Sleeper's actions feel like they have a bad result, a good result, and what's basically a critical hit even better result. And interesting consequences like the one I just described are the exception, not necessarily the rule. The clocks, however, are used to much better effect, especially the ones that represent the passage of time. And this is largely because of another system dictating how you act and move through the world. At the start of every day, you get a bunch of randomly rolled dice, and these pre-rolled dice can be used to perform various activities. If you have something really important that you can't afford to screw up, throw a 6 in there and you've got a guaranteed success. But sooner or later, you get down to your less great rolls, the 1s and 2s, and then the results start getting a little more dicey. But you still want to take the gamble, because getting more dice means advancing to the next day, and that means all those clocks, good or bad, get to tick away. Beyond that, Citizen Sleeper is largely a game about managing scarcity. You start on the bottom rung of society, basically homeless and without a cent to your name, and you slowly have to build your way up to having a stable job, a home, and the extra cash to pay for regular doses of medicine that you need to stay alive. This is because in the narrative, you are a sleeper, a robotic copy of someone with most of their memories and personality, but still kinda sorta your own person. In true cyberpunk fashion, most people existing in this universe are the literal property of one corporation or another. In your case, you signed the dotted line to give ownership of your body to a corporation, and in turn, you'd get to live on as an android. There are two deeply unfortunate caveats to this deal, however. One, you're basically illegal slave labor for this corporation, and two, your body is designed to constantly deteriorate, and without this one medication that only this one corporation makes, you'll just die. Rather nasty fine print there. This whole setup is fertile ground for a lot of really evocative and existential writing about what it's like both to be a machine and to be a copy of another person. All of which is wonderfully written prose, but it also sets you up in a uniquely precarious position. Having just escaped from a life of servitude with nothing but the shirt on your back, you are penniless, alone, and scrounging for every scrap you can get, desperately trying to drag yourself up bit by bit towards basic subsistence. The process of going from rags to riches, from absolutely nothing to a digital god, is a well-worn arc to build a video game around. But Citizen Sleeper emphasizes the nothing origins you come from more than the ultimate power fantasy you arrive at. It's not the progress itself, but the desperation, the frantic scramble to somehow reach stability while frequently being undercut and experiencing setbacks that largely drives the tone of the game, both mechanically and narratively. But another way in which Citizen Sleeper decides to stand apart from much of the medium is that the game never leaves you alone in this struggle for subsistence. See, in running away from home, you've ended up on the rough and tumble cyberpunk streets of the Eye, an old former mining station filled with mobsters, mercenaries, and gruff-talking hardasses. Life here is hard. Most people live in the slums, everything costs money you don't have, and the entire space station is an ancient, deeply scarred contraption barely holding itself together that could just collapse entirely and kill everyone on it tomorrow. A more straightforward game would look at this setting and fill it with rival gangs trying to conquer each other and cynical, wisecracking mercenaries. We've all played that game 20 times. But Citizen Sleeper emphatically refuses to go that route. It takes this cynical, hard, and grimy setting, and it makes it warm, even frequently kind. The world building of Citizen Sleeper sets up this bleak, brutal, and deeply cruel universe, one that is undeniably steeped in cyberpunk's dystopic themes where people are numbers and resources to be pushed around by greater capitalistic forces with no regard to their well-being. Almost everyone you meet has been abused just as thoroughly by the powers that be in this setting as you have. But where most games would take a cynical and grimdark approach to this, instead, everyone in the Eye collectively works in their own way to make it a safe space from their own universe's worst ravages. This is a game about community and how, in the face of hardship, people come together and cling to each other for support. Citizen Sleeper still has plenty of factional rivalries and even characters that straight up hate each other. There is no shortage of strife in this game. But throughout it all, no matter what happens, there is a real sense that everybody you meet, even the ones that don't get along, are ultimately on the same team and want a lot of the same things. Even the hard-as-nails mob enforcer literally just wants to get along. The real struggle in Citizen Sleeper isn't usually against individual threats. It's usually something far more basic and mundane, like starvation. It is exceptionally rare that you actually encounter something that actively wants to do you harm in this world. And when you do, it is always an outside force, something foreign infringing upon the community of the Eye that wants to press in and exert its influence over it. And like a body's immune system, the entire Eye always seems to recognize these threats and comes together to help you expel them. Even the developer themselves is nakedly on your side, with prose that is frequently furious on your behalf at the state of the world and the indignities it's committed against you. Sometimes you're the immune system. You're the helpful Samaritan working to maintain the community, doing the usual video game thing where you become best friends with your social link NPC pal by solving all their life problems for them. But far more often, you are the one being helped. Most often, you're the one who needs a random bartender you've literally never met to point a gun at your abuser and tell him he's not welcome. Or a sympathetic doctor you've just met to put themselves at risk to get you life-saving medicine. Or a completely different bartender to physically throw out some racist shit that's ragging on you for being a robot, and then turn around and just hand you a job with no strings attached so you can pay for that medicine. The outside world is brutally stacked against you, but everyone else in Citizen Sleeper is always in your corner. And there's a gentleness to that. One that most video games, even the ones that start you entirely underpowered at the bottom of a vast food chain, never even require you to consider. The idea of ever having to rely on anyone outside of yourself is an entirely foreign concept to 90% of the medium. Whether it's a business sim or a survival crafter, all you need is your own ingenuity and a few mechanical systems weighted in your favor, and one day you'll inevitably pull yourself to the top of the heap and stand head and shoulders over the game, the masterful conqueror that pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps. But in Citizen Sleeper, you don't elevate yourself. You are dragged, arm over arm, out of the muck of your desperate starting conditions by the people around you. And that right there is Citizen Sleeper's true beauty. When characters in this game are given difficult choices to make between the noble act and the self-preserving one, between helping victims and defending abusers, between resisting abusive systems of power or upholding those systems for personal gain, they will 100% of the time choose to help. This is a game with beautiful prose, exploring fascinating science fiction concepts with well-thought-out, nuanced stories crisscrossing a compelling setting. But the emotional nugget at its core that truly makes it sing is its almost indignant sense of righteousness, with prose that is absolutely furious at its own setting's injustices and a cast that is almost unconditionally committed to standing against them. Citizen Sleeper's world is harsh and brutal, and it will kick you down time and time again. And yet, because of the people living in it, it's such a wonderful and beautiful one to live in for just a few hours. So yeah, that's Citizen Sleeper in a nutshell. Please go buy this game, and if you've got some spare cash after that and like this video, consider hitting up my Patreon, because I too need to eat and would very much appreciate the tip. But I hope you enjoyed this review of Citizen Sleeper, and I'll see you all next time.